Yesterday in Baltimore, Southpaw Bill Clinton threw his first pitch as president, inaugurating Major League Baseball's 118th season. While the ritual of opening day played out inside the park, outside, the Reverend Jesse Jackson led a protest against baseball's minority hiring practices. It was just one more reminder that modern baseball is played both on and off the diamond. And today, the game's troubles off the field have come to dominate our national pastime. Tonight on Frontline, what's wrong with baseball?
I've stopped liking baseball because I don't count. You don't count. The game is not played for us.
Frontline examines the struggle between millionaire players and millionaire owners for control of the game.
I think one of the things that's really hurt baseball and has changed the image so much is that now we focus so much on money.
Tonight, the trouble with baseball.
With funding provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This is Frontline.
In America, the first sounds of spring are the sounds of baseball. At spring training, the clean hopes for the new season mingle with still bright memories of seasons past.
I was 7 years old, and walking up, and there's that little bit of mustiness as you come up the runway, and then my eyes being opened as a child, that greenness. It was almost like walking into a forest.
I remember the whole sweep of the field and the grass and the people and the noise.
When I was hanging around getting autographs in high school, the thing to do, you'd get a picture, and then you would persuade the player to put your name on it as if he knew who you were.
Hey, let's go.
In a way, it's like jazz. Jazz is a homegrown American art form. And baseball is, I suppose, its original sports form. There's a nice, easy, sunny quality to it. A sunshine quality to it.
But this year, the hopes that surround each new baseball season have been battered by a brutal winter off the field. After the World Series, the networks argued that their next contract would drastically reduce baseball owners' income, and half the teams were already losing money. The financial pressure escalated the war between owners and players, the owners talking lockout, the players' union talking strike. And then there was Marge Schott.
Hey, Marge, you said you weren't going to do
Yes, the man, honey.
The owners were embarrassed into suspending the Cincinnati Reds owner for making racist remarks. They fired Commissioner Fay Vincent for acting in the interests of baseball,
I think
not just the owners.
you could see what these people were saying. I think the threat's real. I think.
And then Congress threatened to end the owners' monopoly over baseball.
What conceivable reason is there for us to continue to give baseball this unique privilege that no other sport, no other business in America has?
High school, Kobe.
But all the headlines are just symptoms of a deeper problem. At the heart of baseball's trouble is a monumental struggle between millionaires. A showdown between the players and owners for control of this $1.5 billion game.
The basic
problem between the players and the owners is that it's been a battle for the economics of the game. The owners just refuse to accept the fact that the players are their partners. It really is a them versus us mentality. The players' loyalty is to the union and to other players in the league. Players know now that it may be a game between the white lines, but it certainly is a business outside the white lines. So there is a foxhole mentality that exists in baseball. It's the players on one side and the owners on the other.
Baseball's troubles were born 18 years ago, on the night of perhaps its greatest game. October 1975, Fenway Park in Boston. It is Game 6 of the World Series. The upstart Boston Red Sox against the dominant team of the era, the Cincinnati Reds. Louis Tiant against Pete Rose. Griffey and Fisk. The great Joe Morgan. It is a seesaw game with great catches and heartbreaking misses.
I'll be okay. Sure? Okay, Louis.
By the 8th inning, Boston's best pitcher has failed. If the Red Sox lose, Cincinnati will be the world champions. In the bottom of the 9th, behind by 3 runs, Boston bats. Bernie Carbo pinch hits. With 2 men on, he quickly gets 2 strikes. Then miraculously, a home run. The game is tied 6-6. In the top of the 12th, the Reds' Joe Morgan hits a sure home run. But it's caught by Dwight Evans. He throws out Griffey at first. Even Reds manager Sparky Anderson said, "It's just about the greatest catch I've ever seen." That catch sets up one of the most memorable moments in baseball history. It's now after midnight. The game is still tied in the bottom of the 12th inning. Coming up to bat is local New England hero, Boston catcher Carlton Fisk.
I can remember standing on the on-deck circle with Fred Lynn and just knowing something good was going to happen. How? I don't know. I just felt that something was going to happen.
The first pitch from Cincinnati reliever Pat Darcy is high, ball 1.
There it goes, the long drive. If it stays fair, home run.
It's almost like it happened to somebody else. Maybe because it was one of those moments where you were actually somebody else, or you stepped outside yourself or above for a moment. That one moment in the universe that is yours and yours alone, and nobody else can share it, or maybe nobody else can even understand it.
More than 60 million Americans saw Fisk will his dramatic home run to stay a fair ball. It was the largest audience for a World Series in television history. That hit, that game, has been called baseball's Big Bang.
2 forces came together at that time which have dramatically changed the way the game is played off the field today. The first was television's realization that baseball could be sold to the public at prime time. And because of that, the dollars started to flow into the game. Right after that game, the arbitrator in Kansas City opened the doors to allow players to move from one club to another when their contracts were up, which forced the clubs to enter into a new collective bargaining agreement. So at the same time that additional revenues were coming into the game, the players now were getting more power to negotiate a bigger share of that pie.
Carlton Fisk becomes the first player in the series to hit.
When Carlton Fisk hit his home run, he was making $80,000 a year. The average player was earning $45,000.
12 innings, And Carlton
When I
Fisk.
started playing, baseball basically was viewed as a summertime job, even if you were in the major leagues. I played my first year, 140 games for $12,000. And, you know, I was in the big leagues.
Baseball owners, like the Red Sox' Tom Yaki, had extraordinary control over player salaries because of something called the reserve clause in all player contracts.
Under the reserve rules, a player was property. He was owned by that organization really for the rest of his natural life, unless the organization decided to sell him for cash or trade him for another player.
In 1966, the players hired labor lawyer Marvin Miller to take up their cause. For 9 years, Miller led the players through court cases, bare-knuckles negotiations, and a strike. By 1975, Miller and the Players Union had broken the reserve clause and created free agency, which allowed experienced players to sell their services to any club. They also started a system of salary arbitration to settle disputes between owners and players. But for Carlton Fisk, the coincidence of his greatest moment as a player and the union's victory launched him on a painful odyssey that mirrors the troubles of Major League Baseball itself. In the offseason, after the 1975 series, Fisk rejected the Red Sox offer of $125,000. He and two other players decided to play the season without contracts. If the Red Sox could not sign them, they would become free agents. The fans did not approve.
People were terribly upset, and people were throwing things at them, screaming at them. I mean, we had people bang on the bus, yelling at Fisk and Burleson one time coming out of the ballpark. And all they were doing, for the first time, there was this free market. But the contracts they signed, by today's standards, were almost laughable.
By August, Fisk gave in and signed again with the Red Sox for $170,000, double his old salary. Fisk would stay in Boston, but the movement of other players was underway. For the next 3 years, some of the biggest names in baseball, like Reggie Jackson, changed teams, beneficiaries of high-stakes bidding by owners.
I think players began to realize that their opportunities were not limited just to the team they played for. Instead of just thinking about your hometown team your entire career, you thought more about baseball as an industry across state boundaries.
This sudden movement of star players sparked intense fan interest. With the addition of one or two key players, any team could quickly improve their fortunes on the field. But free agency also had a dark side, as it broke down old loyalties between players, the teams, and the fans.
Never once did I ever think that I would be playing somewhere else. You know, that was the dream of most of the boys in New England, was either to play for the Celtics or play for the Red Sox. There were no other teams, there were no other dreams, at least related to sports anyways. I thought I'd end my career in Boston.
By 1980, Fisk had played in Fenway Park 9 years. He was an all-star 7 times, but in the off-season, the Red Sox management lost their star. In a colossal blunder, the Red Sox postmarked his contract 2 days too late.
So I called him up, and I said, you know, I read this, and what can you tell me? Well, he said, it's true. He said, you know, I have not been on good terms with the club, and they've been bickering back and forth, and they didn't make me a decent offer all year, and they haven't even sent me a contract.
Fisk demanded to be a free agent. The case went to arbitration, and at a team lunch, Red Sox managing partner Haywood Sullivan burst into the room with the bad news.
Well, Mr. Sullivan, I just received a call from New York. It pertains to the Fisk case. Fisk has been declared a free agent by Raymond Getz. It happened about 2 hours ago. So open the bar again if you want to.
1 month later, Fisk sold himself to the Chicago White Sox for $600,000 a year.
That were available, and one was,
The White Sox had just been bought by Jerry Reinsdorf for $19 million.
Bill says they're real, but he won't tell me which key goes into which lock, so we're going to have to figure that out.
Carlton Fisk had hitched his future to one of the new breed of baseball owners.
Jerry Reinsdorf, before he bought the White Sox, was one of the brightest lawyers and savviest real estate syndicators in the city of Chicago. I believe at the time he was in his late 40s. He had a few choices. Some men, unfortunately, choose new wives, some choose new businesses, or some buy new toys. And I think Jerry and his partners found a new toy here.
I saw it as something I'd really enjoy doing, and like all fans, I thought that I could run a team better than the jerks that, have been running it in the past. And I'd gotten so much benefit out of being in Chicago. I thought it'd be a great way to give something back to the community, to buy a team and win the World Series.
At the time when I came over, the organization basically was under new ownership, by months. They obviously appeared to me not to know much about baseball. They were obviously wealthy enough to know a lot about business.
Well, Jerry, I have to say that we picked one of the strangest years to make our debut in the baseball business.
But what a fabulous start we've made towards bringing a winner to this great city of Chicago.
How could anyone forget that day? A record opening day crowd of over 51,000 fans were there. And on that day, Chicago's new hero, Carlton Fisk, hit a grand slam to beat Milwaukee. Fisk loved it. The team loved it. We sure loved it. But best of all, what a great day for Chicago fans.
And the best thing about it, Eddie?
I know, it was only the beginning.
Only the beginning.
The signing of Carlton Fisk as a free agent in 1981 was incredibly important because the White Sox at that time were the Rodney Dangerfield of baseball. Nobody gave the White Sox any respect. When Fisk became a free agent, none of our fans ever thought that the White Sox could sign a premier player like that. And when we were able to pull that off, it immediately created credibility.
The first time Fisk played in Boston, he beat his former teammates with a game-winning home run. But he had lost something, too.
I had a hard time dealing with my relationship with myself, walking in front of the mirror with that uniform on, I had to, it startled me. I was like, who is that? It's somebody else.
Acquiring Fisk was the new owner's first big move to improve the hapless White Sox. They would pay him $3 million over 5 years.
The White Sox deal, if I may use a baseball metaphor, was not a home run from the start. They spent quite a bit of money on free agents, Carlton Fisk among them, and there was a capital call among the partners in the first few years. I can't remember the exact amount of money, but they all had to write a few checks because there were some, there were some business problems in the first couple of years.
But then, as baseball luck would have it, the White Sox caught fire and won their division.
When we won in '83, we actually made $1 million. But at that point, I realized that this was going to be extremely difficult. Winning is expensive because you pay for winning. After a team has won, your salaries jump up dramatically, and then it's very hard to win the second time.
He started slashing the payroll so he wouldn't have to make another capital call among his owners. And as the team, after winning, deteriorated so dramatically in terms of quality, his reputation started to suffer somewhat.
In 1984, the White Sox finished next to last. Attendance would slide for the next 5 years. Tony La Russa, one of baseball's best managers, left. Reinsdorf began to trade away his expensive free agents, and he didn't buy any more.
We couldn't afford to just spend millions and millions of dollars, and then it wasn't working anyway. I mean, signing free agents is a triumph of hope over experience, because if you look at the records of players who leave their teams and sign long-term contracts with a new team, almost invariably they have bad years.
Reinsdorf, of course, was not the only owner worried about rising salaries. In 1985, Commissioner Peter Ueberroth told the owners that spending for free agents was leading them to financial ruin. Secretly, the owners decided to do something about it. For the next 3 winters, the owners refused to bid on some of the best free agents in baseball. Hundreds of experienced players withered in the marketplace. One of them was Carlton Fisk.
What Jerry tried to do to me in the winter of that first collusion year, he tried to allow me to leave the White Sox and to go out as a free agent into that collusive market. And I didn't want to, and I refused to. But he wanted me to go out in the market and shrivel and die.
An arbitrator found the owners guilty of conspiring to hold down salaries. In a settlement, they agreed to pay the players $280 million.
Remember that the worst scandal in the history of the game was said to be 8 players throwing some games in one World Series. Here, for 4 years, all of the owners and all of their officials, their commissioner, the league presidents, their attorneys, everybody, was in a collusion conspiracy not to improve a single team for any pennant race for close to 4 years. Which was the bigger scandal?
In the mid-'80s, while the owners benefited from their secret collusion, television revenues continued to expand dramatically. In Chicago, Jerry Reinsdorf was now making money with the White Sox. But on the field, the team's fortunes continued to sag.
I don't think that's a secret, at least in Chicago, that the owner would rather just stay competitive. That's where he makes his biggest profit margin, if he's just competitive. Doesn't have to win.
And Reinsdorf had another idea to make the White Sox more profitable. He asked the state of Illinois to build him a new stadium because he thought he couldn't make enough money in old Comiskey Park.
Because of the influence of television on the economics of baseball and the fact that you had to go to the free agent market to buy players early and often, you needed a stadium that was economically not obsolete. And Comiskey Park was economically obsolete because you had a lot of posts, you had about 20,000 obstructed seats that you could not maximize revenue off of on a unit-for-unit basis.
On opening day in 1985, in his owner's box, Reinsdorf started to sell the idea to his old friend from law school, Illinois Governor Jim Thompson.
They really didn't have to sell me. I mean, I think I knew that I didn't want to lose the White Sox for the city and for the state, and so I was a willing partner from the beginning. And I was willing to accommodate almost any set of arrangements as long as they made sense to me as the keeper of the state purse.
But Reinsdorf's plan was attacked by legislators who said the new stadium didn't make financial sense. So in 1988, he brought the issue to a crisis. He threatened to move the White Sox. Reinsdorf flew to Florida, where he met the governor and was offered a brand new, rent-free domed stadium by the city of St. Petersburg.
People were very, very upset and very hurt and felt very betrayed that the owners of a baseball team, who in most customers' mind not only operate a business, but are really the keepers of a public trust, would do such a thing to the taxpayers, which was them, they themselves. They couldn't believe it.
As opposition mounted, a critical vote on the new Chicago stadium loomed in the Illinois legislature.
We didn't have much time to spare in the House, and there weren't a lot of fancy arguments. And in the House, the opponents were already singing na 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 goodbye, you know. They wanted to see the White Sox go. I mean, there was a contingent of the legislature that said, hey, let them go. So I had to fight that notion.
Right now, I'll be voting no on that legislation. No more new stadiums.
They're about to take the record on this. This may be it for the White Sox. There is a great deal of tension in here. People are waiting for the gavel to come down.
WMAQ radio was carrying the proceedings, and I listened And Thompson came on the floor, and they kept announcing one more vote, and all of a sudden it looked like this thing was going to pick up steam and we were going to get to the 60 votes that we needed.
To get the stadium, Thompson had to find enough votes by midnight.
I'm not sure what clock these folks are using.
The Speaker of the House ignored the real time until the governor twisted one more arm. Thompson won.
In their brief visit to the state capitol,
The state would issue $150 million in bonds to build the new ballpark. Reinsdorf got his new stadium, and it would be rent-free if he didn't sell 1.2 million tickets a year.
The governor was pleased.
Comiskey Park is actually designed a lot like Disney World. Everything moves unseen. The clubhouse is one of the largest clubhouses in baseball. Behind us here, you will see Carlton Fisk's locker. Carlton gets the place of honor. He gets the one closest to the training room. There are 1,000 doors in Comiskey Park. We're going into a room that has about $1 million worth of equipment in it. This is called the club level. 1,800 seats, private access, waiter and waitress service at your seat, and a great view of the game. This is a members-only club. For season ticket holders, it costs $500 a year for a membership, plus your food and beverage. This is pretty typical of one of our suites that rents for $60,000 a year. This is the main eating area of the stadium club. You can really sometimes forget that there's a game going on. It's a little quieter in here. You have a great steak in front of you, a great glass of wine. It can distract you.
You like going to Comiskey Park? Don't like going to Comiskey Park?
I have been to the new Comiskey, and if you are not sitting on the lower level, you may as well not even go.
I don't like
right,
the
are
new
you?
ballpark. I don't. It's too mallish.
I don't like skyboxes, and I don't like valet parking. That is not the true baseball fan, and I think it'd be nice if we could return a large portion of the stadium to the working class so we could all have a little more fun there.
I was raised a White Sox fan to the hilt. I've got to admit, though, after this thing happened, I stopped going. And it's not just Comiskey Park. I've stopped liking baseball. I don't count. You don't count. The game is not played for us. It is played for television. The economic scale of baseball has taken away what was so profoundly human about it.
Novelty Stands is located at the left field corner of the grandstand on the lower contour.
By the winter of 1992, for the fans in Chicago, the White Sox troubles of the 1980s had become a distant memory. For the first time in a decade, it was beginning to look like the team was a serious contender for the American League pennant. Jerry Reinsdorf's strategy of trading away older, more expensive players and rebuilding his team around younger men had finally paid off.
Starting in the middle of the '89 season, our team got better. And we've been a significant contender in 90, 91, 92, and I'm sure that 93, a lot of people think that we're going to win.
Reinsdorf and his partners had turned the club around financially as well. In the last 2 years alone, they earned $35 million in profits.
Rob, here's something I brought back from Phoenix. Larry Yount has come up with an interesting idea.
Reinsdorf, who also owns the Chicago Bulls, had become a powerful figure in professional sports. His baseball management team had earned a reputation as one of the best in the business.
Where do we stand on the issue of raglan sleeves on the home jerseys?
There's a couple things we have to make decisions on. Do we want to raise the parking this year?
I don't think we should ask for big
Not on
favors because
this.
it costs us something. We always cost you something.
We have to stand on somebody's chest this year and get this done right.
So I don't want to go nuts. I mean, I think we should support the Hall of Fame, and it is over 4 years, so it's not a lot of money per year.
He's a very practical, hard-nosed businessman who puts a good product on the field and makes money with the team. And I think Reinsdorf is viewed by a lot of people as about the best operator of a franchise in the game.
But not everybody is doing so well. Just 90 miles up Lake Michigan, the Milwaukee Brewers. the smallest franchise in baseball is in big trouble.
I remember my first few years running the Brewers, 1970, 71, and 72. This was a simple little $3 million operation. And you had to figure out how to generate $3 million in revenue. Now you're in a situation, we have 3 or 4 players on this team making $3 million plus a year. So everything's changed.
The Brewers finished near the top of their division last year. They beat their rivals, the Chicago White Sox, 7 times out of 12. But while the White Sox took in nearly $80 million, the Brewers grossed only about half that.
Now we've got about 5,000 seats that are not sold, but they're being held for the player allotment.
What that means for Milwaukee's front office is that every dollar counts.
You can have 5 setup cars.
There's a problem that we're having, and Tim brought this up the other day. We pay $400 every time we have to rent that tent from Carl's.
The day-to-day running of the team is handled by Bud Selig's daughter, Wendy.
The real problem, an inherent problem with being a small market, is that our revenues are determined strictly by the demographics of our market. However, our expenses, and our primary expense, of course, being player salaries, is determined by the 28 markets, including New York, LA, Chicago. And so it's become increasingly difficult to operate in a small market and to stay competitive.
The real problem for small market teams like Milwaukee is the money they get from television. Every major league team gets the same share of network television revenues, $13.5 million last year. But because Milwaukee is such a small market, it receives only $3.1 million from local television. The White Sox get almost 3 times that from channels in Chicago.
It's often referred to that the New York Yankees get somewhere in the neighborhood of $50 million for their local television rights. So their dependency on their portion of the national TV rights obviously far less significant than a club like the Milwaukee Brewers.
Last year, $4 million. And so the Seligs cut back on the most important payroll of all, their players.
Paul Molitor, Jim Gantner, and Robin Yount played together longer than any other 3 players in the history of baseball. But we got to a point this year where Paul Molitor was a free agent. There's no question he would have liked to have stayed here, and we would have very much liked for him to have stayed here. But we got to a point where Toronto was able to offer him a far more lucrative contract than we were able to, and as a result, he's now a Toronto Blue Jay.
The more Nicky stuffs, the better off we are here in Milwaukee. That's right.
Get those tickets out in the mail.
As costs go up, the Brewers' fortunes are tied directly to their ability to get fans into the stadium. But they play in old, tired county stadium, where open beams block thousands of seats. In fact, Sports Illustrated recently named this area the 2nd worst seat in baseball.
We have it. We have it all here. For that couple who wants to spend some time alone, we have it right here. 2nd worst seat in baseball. Would hate to get that worst seat.
You can't raise ticket prices indiscriminately. This is family entertainment. We agonized over a dollar ticket at our most expensive seats. The others we don't touch. And you have no idea what kind of reaction you get from people about that. And yet, if you do that, you're still only talking about generation of another $1 million at the most of net revenue.
So Bud Selig wants a new stadium, and he wants a share of the larger club's television revenue. Otherwise, the city of Milwaukee might lose its team.
You have the big market cities, the big television markets, such as Chicago, New York, Atlanta, which refuse to share their local television revenues with the small market teams, like Milwaukee and Seattle as examples. However, they do compete for the same product. They do compete to buy players. And as a result, the small markets are being killed by the big markets buying up the small market players.
Back in Chicago, the White Sox have learned how to make money, even in the dead of winter. It's called Sox Fest. On a cold February afternoon, thousands of eager fans spend $15 for an early baseball fix.
White Sox souvenirs, pick 'em out.
There's booths here, there's autographs, there's vendors, there's all sorts of memorabilia. This is a great way for an organization to sell tickets and to increase its visibility in the prime selling time of the year when it comes to season tickets and sponsorships.
Welcome to Sox Fest 93.
The players were here too, out of uniform but freshly signed to their contracts.
And of course, no introduction needed for the best shortstop in baseball, who's back with us now after that injury, Ozzie Guillen.
Ozzie Guillen, $6.5 million over 4 years.
The one and only Mickey Sean Abner.
$550,000 a year.
Ron Carcabite.
3 years, $5.75 million.
He is the greatest athlete that I have ever seen. Bo Jackson.
If he plays all season, he could earn $2.5 million.
Our payroll the first year, I think, was about $3 million. Now our payroll probably is going to be in the middle 30 millions. So payroll has gone up 10 times since the beginning, but it took a year or two before I realized that, what was going to happen.
Here's how Reinsdorf says he loses control of his own payroll. Take the case of Jack Mcdowell.
White Sox ace Black Jack McDowell became the first Major League pitcher to win 20 games in 1992, and the right-hander received
This winter, McDowell asked for $4 million. Reinsdorf offered $3.1 million. McDowell took the White Sox to arbitration. When players in the 4th, 5th, and 6th years in the major leagues cannot agree with their owner on a salary, the dispute is settled by an arbitrator who must decide whether the club's offer or the player's demand is the most fair. The White Sox argued that McDowell had only 4 years' service, and no player that young had ever been paid $4 million. And it looked like the arbitrator was going to agree.
Fine. The hearing ends, and within 5 hours, the Atlanta Braves announced they've signed John Smoltz to $16 million for 4 years. Same exact service. There goes the argument. It's out the window. If they held off for 48 hours, Reinsdorf would have won the arbitration case.
We're at the mercy of an arbitrator. We have to pay each of our players what our dumbest competitor pays his players.
But Jerry Reinsdorf's ugliest battle over money this year was with Carlton Fisk. Now 45, Fisk wanted to play at least one more season so he could break the major league record for the most games ever played by a catcher. But Reinsdorf offered Fisk $500,000, only half of what he was paid last year. Fisk refused to sign. And for the 7th time in 13 years, they were fighting over money.
I run the whole gamut of emotions at times. I run from angry to mad. I run from discouraged to disappointed to not caring.
Carlton Fisk's a great ball player, and he's done a lot for this franchise, and the fans love him, and they want him back. But how many years should you overpay him? In 1992, Carlton Fisk made over $1 million and played in about 50 games. And I think Carlton Fisk was entitled to have a year where he got paid more than he produced, but not 2 years.
I think it's all started out personally, and then it's just gotten worse and worse. And Jerry can say what he wants. As far as he likes me, he does not like me. And I don't like what he's done to me.
I don't dislike him. Well, when you're not taping, I'll talk to you about that.
12 years ago, Carlton Fisk ignited Jerry Reinsdorf's new White Sox, and for much of his career was considered the best catcher in the game. During that time, Reinsdorf had paid him $13.5 million.
And it's really sad that it ends up this way, that he is cold, hard cash. But Reinsdorf sitting there saying, hey, this is all business. Fisk has no other market. I'll give him what I want to give him. And he'll play for whatever, he'll play for me for whatever, and there's no romance or no sentiment involved, and it's too bad. And I think Fisk is going out just like another guy who had to fight for a contract, and it's very sad.
In December, as Carlton Fisk faced the bitter ending of his long career, baseball leaders gathered at their annual winter meetings.
Well, this is sort of like the annual convention of baseball. You sort of, if you're anybody in baseball, you have to be here. And it just really, it's a great gossip center.
And the talk at this year's meetings was all about how the owners and players would divide up Major League Baseball's billions. They finally had to deal with the bad news. The television networks had lost $500 million on baseball, and they made it clear they would cut back sharply on the next contract. Behind closed doors, the owners were in disarray. They had fired Commissioner Fay Vincent, and now they couldn't begin to agree on a solution to baseball's problems.
Without a commissioner in place right now, there really is no leadership among the owners. The only thing they can agree on is that the players make too much money.
Milwaukee's Bud Selig was now running baseball as head of the owners' executive committee. They had hired Richard Ravitch, a New York politician, to force new contract talks with the players.
The state of baseball is that the owners just finished a season in which they essentially made no money from operations whatsoever. They suffered some reductions in attendance this year. And baseball's been told that they could expect some not inconsiderable reduction in the amount of their national TV contract in 1994. So they face some potential problems on the revenue side, potentially very serious problems.
But even as the owners argued that baseball's bottom line was lousy, they were also proving they lacked the self-control to fix it. The players were at the winter meetings too. Pitcher David Cohn has a great fastball, and he's available.
How we're going to structure it. You know, we talked in general.
Just off camera, his agent waited for the feeding frenzy. And he didn't have to wait long. Cohn was snapped up by Kansas City for $18 million over 3 years. And then there was Barry Bonds.
It's like a boyhood dream that comes true for me.
After a bidding war, the 28-year-old Bonds became the richest player in baseball. The owners of the San Francisco Giants had just agreed to pay him $44 million over 6 years. In one 24-hour period, owners coughed up $260 million for free agents.
I think this last December really hit some guys between the eyes. Some of these owners are like kids with their first Visa cards. I mean, they don't really see the cause and effect of, I spend now, the bill comes in with 21% interest later. And they're starting to realize that they signed this guy here for X amount of money, bam, it impacts somebody else in arbitration.
The signings that have taken place in the last 4 months have been absolutely staggering. Baseball has already committed for 1994 over $480 million for only 182 players. That's out of a total of roughly 700 players. Now, that $480 million is more than the entire payroll of baseball was in 1989.
The owner's only solution was to go to the players and demand a salary cap, which would limit their pay to a fixed percentage of the owner's income. They told Ravitch to begin negotiations.
Dick is a man who loves challenges, loves the dirt under the fingernails, and it's like a political campaign for him.
Ravitch told the players he wanted the salary cap in place by next year. If not, the owners might lock the players out of spring training.
What they've basically done is they've fired the first volley across the bow. They're not necessarily saying we're going for your broadside, but we've got our ammunition loaded up and ready to go.
But the president of the Players Union, Donald Fear, had other ideas.
Wait a minute, before you come looking to the players, you better get your own house in order. If they want the players to take less, they better be prepared to quantify how much less and why it's needed and where it's going and why it should come from player sources than other sources.
Is this working?
Fear said he won't talk salary caps until the owners begin to share their local television revenue.
Fear is sitting there in the catbird seat and really is not going to budge on any form of concession until, number one, the owners get together and figure out how to share their revenues more equitably, and then the question only becomes what percentage of the pot goes to the entertainers and what percentage of the pot goes to the promoters.
You know, you love the game, that's why you get in it, but I never realized when I got in it there'd be so many problems. It's not CBS.
Revenue sharing was a hot topic among the owners and in this discussion between the White Sox Eddie Einhorn and Jack Sands.
Until your club, Steinbrenners of the world, Ted Turner, WGN, are prepared to do some form of revenue sharing with the other clubs, how can they expect the players to handle the problem themselves?
You know, when we bought this team, we bought the market of Chicago. We didn't buy Cincinnati, we didn't buy Pittsburgh. We bought Chicago, all right? Therefore, before I share my money with the lesser market, who might not run it as well, who might spend it, before I give my money to another guy who might hurt me, I want to know that there's something in it for me. We will straighten it out, I guarantee.
The big market owners are unwilling to help out the small market owners, except to help them get money from the players. The only thing they can ever agree upon among themselves is that players make too much money and everybody's problems would be eased to whatever extent you can get the players to take less money in some fashion.
Unless they come to believe that the national television revenues are going to be down by millions of dollars per club, until they recognize that and accept the reality of that, they're living in a dream world and they're kidding themselves. And I'll tell you, the mark of any good businessman in this world and the mark of any good union leader is not to wait until the shit hit the fan before you do something, but to anticipate it and prepare for it and plan for it.
They have to come together and then go to the players and say, all right, we need to have a partnership. We have to be in this together. We've got to stop fighting. We've got to stop complaining about one another. We've got to act in the best interest of this business together.
Baseball's winter meetings ended in chaos, without a new commissioner, without an agreement among the owners about revenue sharing, and with the owners and the players far apart on what to do about baseball's problems.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. How are you today? Where are you heading for, sir? To the U.S. Senate. All right.
The day after the winter meetings, baseball's leaders were summoned to Capitol Hill.
Not the first time that there have been congressional hearings on baseball's antitrust exemption. I think what makes it somewhat different this time is the joker in the deck, which is the former commissioner Fay Vincent, because the owner so recently ousted Fay as commissioner. I think there is some concern that his testimony could be damaging to them. Bud Selig, of course, head of the Executive Council, and the Commissioner Pro Tem will be batting second. The question is, will he be trying to move Fay over to second, or will he be trying to hit into a double play to get it over with?
They'll probably be very cordial with each other, even though Vincent was fired by Selig. Probably the one group of people that they dislike more than each other or the Players Association is Congress.
The only way Congress can control baseball's owners is through the special exemption from the antitrust laws that allows baseball to act as a monopoly. Congress was angry enough about Vincent's firing and baseball's disorder that it was now threatening to remove the exemption.
Please be seated. One of the things you have to bear in mind is I take the view that the commissioner can't be fired, but anybody who thinks I wasn't fired is naive.
Without a strong commissioner to take responsibility for baseball, many in Congress fear the owners will simply loot the game.
From the next commissioner.
What ails baseball in America, Mr. Chairman, is irresponsible team ownership.
Ownership that with each passing year increasingly acts as if baseball is its personal fiefdom, to be operated for one purpose, profit for the owners. They're truly out of control.
At the same time, I would
The owner's
like to
chairman,
introduce
Bud Selig, tried to calm the committee's temper and assure it that baseball was under control.
I don't think there's anything threatening about that, in my judgment. On the contrary, I think if you look at these actions and you understand the statements of people, I think that, frankly, we've acted very responsibly and very sensitively.
But the committee was in no mood to be calmed.
Baseball seems to play the kind of hardball you see in most other businesses. Under those circumstances, what conceivable reason is there for us to continue to give baseball this unique privilege that no other sport, no other business in America has? Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Following the
next
hearing,
witness.
2 bills were introduced to eliminate baseball's special antitrust exemption.
Baseball Players Association.
Congress will debate the issue later this spring.
And I fully intend to reintroduce this legislation in the 103rd Congress because I feel strongly that competition and fairness is as important.
Baseball is an American asset, and it's not being run right. And I think part of what we need to do is to bring back the Field of Dreams.
It has been 18 years since Carlton Fisk's home run, the big bang that created baseball's new wealth. The owners and players seem to know that greed is damaging the game, but they are unable to control their appetites.
We've already lost some fans. They're just tired of hearing about these ball players who are making $4 million, wanting $5 million. And they're tired of owners who they think have unlimited funds not being willing to give them the $4 million. They want to read about baseball, and they don't want to read about millionaires fighting with each other.
In March, Carlton Fisk finally returned to the White Sox. He had angrily accepted Reinsdorf's last offer, $650,000. But for Fisk, there was a final insult. Reinsdorf insisted that he sign a minor league contract. The White Sox all-star catcher had no guarantee he would make the team. Fisk would have to prove to Reinsdorf he was still good enough to play in the big leagues.
I think that the Carlton Fisk, Jerry Reinsdorf battle is symbolic of what has turned an awful lot of people off. Instead of a guy, a certain Hall of Famer, who has one of the great moments in baseball history, the 6th game in '75, instead of going out in his last year with dignity, it's that hardline dollar, okay, you know, Jack McDowell's going to get us for $4 million in arbitration. We're going to tuck it to Fisk for whatever we have to pay him. He's as much a victim of arbitration filings, hardlining from players on the upscale as he is from Jerry Reinsdorf.
Hey, guys.
Hi, Bud. You guys twins? Look at your shoes. Huh? Right down to the shoes.
It's too bad that the feelings are so hard in baseball today, and there's so little enjoyment in it, that someone like that has to go out this way. There isn't much love of the game. It's a very hard, bitter business.
Here. Thank you. Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it.
Funding for Frontline is provided by the financial support of viewers like you and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Frontline is produced for the Documentary Consortium by WGBH Boston, which is solely responsible for its content. For video cassette information about this program, please call this toll-free number, 1-800-328-PBS-1.